I've been a regular in this group since we started. My name's Richard Dolan. I write about UFOs. Tonight's lecture is something I've never given before. In fact, I just put it together, finished it this morning. And it's the work based on a very good friend of mine and colleague, a gentleman named Dr. Richard Sauder. A lot of you know who he is. He's probably the most famous researcher in the world, publicly, on the matter of underground bases, underground tunnels, undersea bases, if you can believe that, clandestine bases and tunnels. He started this work back in the mid-90s, and to this day, there's a lot on the web you can find, a lot of researchers who have a specialty in this particular underground base or that particular underground base. But to my knowledge, I've looked around, I haven't seen any other researcher who has really followed on the lead that Richard has taken on this matter. He's published 3 books, 3.5 books, let's say, dealing with this. I mentioned half because one book he wrote that partially deals with this topic. And so when you think about the topic of secret underground bases, if you do a Google on it, you'll come up with Richard Sauder, almost right at the top. I've known Richard now for about 7 or 8 years. He's an extremely perceptive, intelligent guy. So last summer, we've spent many, many hours in personal conversation on the phone. We've talked to each other a lot. And he asked me if I would publish his forthcoming book. I'd only published my own book up till then. I'd never published anybody else's book. But I thought I'd like to do it. And so the result is this book here, which is called Hidden in Plain Sight. It's I think of all of the books that he's done, this is, I think, his best. And I'll be discussing that with you tonight. And actually, even a little bit more than that. I did a little bit of my own research in preparation for this. So, but that book came out in February of this year. And I'm very happy to say people give it very, very good feedback. The other thing about Richard that I think is worth noting is that as of this moment, he's in federal custody. He was arrested. On April 15th, Income Tax Day, Richard scaled the fence at Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota as a form of peaceful protest. Back in the 1980s, Richard Sauder had been a nuclear protester, had been arrested, spent 6 months in prison for that, as a matter of fact. Well, this year he decided to make a statement, took a copy of the United States Constitution, and planted it on top of a silo. You know, he had said to me a month before that the time for armchair blogging was over, and that the time for action is now here because of the state of the mess that the world is in. Runaway governments, runaway military, runaway nukes, runaway secret government, and his attitude was enough. And so this is what he did. There's a videotape of Richard, an extended 37-minute long interview that I shot. So it's on YouTube. Done about a month before he got arrested, in that he gives a very detailed assessment of the state of the world. I would encourage you to look for it. You can find it through the link at my website, keyholepublishing.com. Just follow the links and you'll see it. It's not hard to find. Richard was going to stand trial on May 21st of this year. That date came and went. It was rescheduled now for late July. What I want to do, though, is talk about his research and just the topic of underground sea bases in general. That's a picture of Richard. That's actually, I was sitting right next to him in that photograph in 2004, I believe. Richard's work, in my view, stands on 3 basic legs, like a chair on 3 legs. One leg would be archival research that he's done in a number of archives to get documents and plans by the U.S. military to build substantial, deep underground bases. When I mean deep, we're talking close to a mile. And this is in official records going back to the 1960s. I'll show you a couple of those. Secondly, he himself has a fair amount of personal knowledge of mining and drilling technologies. He worked in that industry for a short while, learned a lot, kept an interest all these years, and could tell you a great deal about state-of-the-art drilling techniques and how easy or how difficult it is to go down, way, way down. The other thing that he's done is travel, a lot of travel, and develop sources. And this is one of those things that I've had to deal with in my own research, and it's always a tricky matter when you get an inside source who just tells you stuff. You don't know how to gauge it sometimes. But I can also say that when you get a lot of sources anonymously coming to you, giving you basically the same type of story again and again, you start to think there's probably something to this. And in the case of Richard's contacts, these are people I've not met personally, but I've talked with him about some of them. He at least came away persuaded that a lot of this was very valid. So on the basis of those three bodies of knowledge, he's put together his work. So let's start by asking ourselves, how far down can people go? Most subways are just not even 100 feet below the surface. But we do know that bases can go much, much farther down than that. The short answer is we can go down really deep. The open literature, and this is something that I just recently found, there's a recently opened gold mine in South Africa, which has now the new record as the world's deepest mine, and it is below 12,000 feet. It goes down about 2 1/3 miles below the surface of the earth. Pretty deep. There's an underground lab. Now, a lab is different from a mine, obviously, and a laboratory's got to be a lot more sophisticated. The world's deepest official underground laboratory is in Canada. It's about 2 kilometers down, 6,800 feet, about 1.25 miles below the surface of the earth. This is a laboratory. The purpose of it, is called Snow Lab, and it stands for Sudbury Neutrino Observatory. The idea is if you're observing neutrinos, you can't do it easily with solar radiation and gamma rays bombarding you. So you need a completely insulated environment, and that means very super deep. This is more than 1 mile down under the surface of the earth, and it's in Canada. It's operational. You can look it up in any open source. It's no longer doing its original mission, I understand, but the facilities have been expanded into a permanent underground laboratory. What they do, I don't know. Perhaps with some research we can find out. But it's in operation, and that's an artist's rendition of it. There's offshore drilling, we all know, can go very, very deep. Now, the deepest is now over 8,000 feet deep, below the level, below sea level. So in other words, you start here, you go down 8,000 feet, and boom, that would now be the deepest offshore rig. That's, what is that, about 1.5 miles, roughly speaking, through straight water. Now, one of the things I would mention, this is something that Richard points out in his book. One of the experts on modern elevator technology, a fellow named James Goodwin, who wrote a book on Otis elevators, mentioned that elevators can be located in all kinds of places that you wouldn't really expect, including, he said, the legs of a deep sea oil production or oil production platform, and in many other extraordinary locations. What Richard Sauder suggested is that some platforms certainly could serve as entry points to manned undersea installations. Unless you think that a manned undersea installation is just crazy, well, stay with me, and by the end of this lecture, you might not think it's so crazy. Now, the argument is not that there are definitely these types of elevators in the legs of these platforms, but that only it is entirely possible. And with various types of clandestine cover, this is not a difficult thing to do.